Welcome back to Fossil Ridge Games. Today I'm going to walk you through an expansion to Scythe Expeditions. This is known as the Gears of Corruption. I'm going to explain the new rules and some of the cool perks and benefits of having this expansion. The Gears of Corruption expansion will increase the player base from a 5-player maximum game to a 6-player maximum game. The other thing that it's going to do is add 2 additional mechs to the game. First one is known as Mole. And here is just kind of a quick sort of zoom in on that miniature. This one has a special ability that when you gather, you can trash a map to act as a corruption as if it's not covering the benefit. So think of the mole as something that can sort of dig down under the corruption and get the bonus on the tile even though the corruption hasn't been removed yet. The next mech that they added to the game is known as Scarecrow. And this one is pretty cool as well. And it's when you finish a refresh turn, you may trash a map to perform one action. You can move, play, or gather. So kind of the name of the game is that you can utilize the map tokens and the map sort of bonuses in the game to your benefit by trashing them. And there's also some cool abilities that are actually on the map tokens that I'll walk you through next. Before I move on to the map tokens, I want to make a note about the Gears of Corruption. Here are one of the player boards, and notice that it's kind of hard to see, but the boards are actually inlaid so that your 2 different markers don't just slide freely. They're actually inlaid, so you have to pick them up. On the original game, sometimes people would accidentally hit these as they're adding stuff to their player board. And notice too, the marker at the top for your actions is also inlaid as well. So they're depressed a little bit so that this stuff doesn't slide all over the board. I think that's a good addition to the game. And they did actually do this to all of the player boards. So even the original player boards from the first game, they gave you replacements so that they're all inlaid. On to the map tokens. Gears of Corruption adds a new type of map token. The red ones are from the original game, which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen. The new ones are actually bordered in purple, and they're actually kind of cool. So I'm going to pull the red one off the screen. If you have a mech and you explore the space, the first thing that you're going to do is take the map token. But guess what? They're double-sided, and they have a bonus on the back side. So once you grab this token, you can get some sort of bonus for it. And this is actually a pretty cool addition to the game. It's going to make you gain resources just a little bit faster than the original game. And when you're gaining resources faster, that means that the game length is going to decrease. And I'm always about expansions that make the game easier to play or faster to play. So I think this is a really good addition to the game. It also incentivizes you to explore the map. In the first game, sometimes there was some reluctance for some of the players to really explore the game map itself, but I think a really exciting part of the game is going to these map tiles that are face down, and now you get sort of an extra bonus and it incentivizes you for going there, and then you can obviously flip the tile over like you normally would and gain the bonuses on the other side. So I think this is a cool addition to the game, and it's a nice way to sort of randomize it. So all of these tokens have different sorts of bonuses and benefits on them. So it kind of adds an additional layer of variability to the game, which is always a nice thing to add. Next, we're going to talk about sort of a quick start style to this game. What you're going to do is you can randomize these cards and hand them out to each player, or you can do a draft, either way. But what you're going to notice on the setup card, and this is the one for Mole, notice at the top of the card, it's going to have the icons listed for both your power and your guile. So what's cool about this is that in the original game, you started with no power and guile. When you start this new upgraded version of the game, you're going to have some existing power and guile on the card as well. So kind of what we're seeing is 1 point of power and then 5 points of guile. So we're going to go over to our player board, and you actually start the game with this. And what's cool is that you can immediately start taking corruption tokens off the board. So it really kind of kickstarts the game. It gives you the ability to just dive right in. The other thing that you're going to notice on these sort of extra setup cards, there is going to be a gold worker. And so we're going to go ahead and talk about that real quick. This gold worker is absolutely fantastic. Now, why would you actually need this gold worker? And the answer is that it's a universal worker. So kind of one of the downfalls of the original game is that when you first started, all of the players really sort of fixated on going to a couple different locations at the beginning of the game. And the reason that why they were doing that is so that they could get workers. So here's an example. You would go to either the sawmill or you go to the isolated settlement. So if you see the bottoms of these cards, when you do your gather action, you're going to notice that you're getting these different workers. Well, these workers are important to trigger the special abilities on your cards. So as an example, if I'm playing this sort of like faction set at the beginning, I need a yellow and a blue worker. Well, when they did the Gears of Corruption, they said, hey, you're going to start with this gold sort of worker. This gold worker is universal. It can play the part of any colored sort of worker in the game. So you actually start with a worker and you can use it to activate some of your starting cards. That's fantastic because at the beginning of the game, especially when you're playing a really high player game, you're going to bog down as people really harvest these workers to get their engines going. So the quick start rules in Gears of Corruption also allows you to have that extra worker, which is fantastic. Something else that that's going to do is that it's going to make it just a little bit faster for you to dive into getting some of your glory tokens. So as an example, one of the win conditions here to get a glory token is that you need to have 7 workers. Well, guess what? You're going to start the game with one of these workers. And that's going to be fantastic. So it's going to make getting these sorts of like glory objectives a little bit faster. In addition to that, one of the other objectives is to gain corruption tokens. And as we talked about before, you're going to start with some guile and you're going to start with some power that helps you get to this objective just much faster. Next up, I'm going to show you an additional thing that they added specifically to the corruption bag to also speed up the game a discrete amount. Next up, we're going to talk about corruption tokens in the expansion. In the original game, you had corruption tokens that ranged from 3 to 5. Gears of Corruption are going to add tokens that have a 2 on them. And what does that really mean for you? What that means is that you're going to have additional combinations when you flip over and reveal one of the terrain cards. So as an example, sort of the mid-range cards, the central cards in the game, are going to need 5+ corruption tokens on them. And then finally, the ones on the north end of the map are going to need 8+. So what's kind of cool is that you have additional combinations to hit either 5 points or 8 points. Now, why is the 2 important? Well, the 2 is important because it can actually appear as one of the corruption tokens on one of these cards. And guess what? You're going to need slightly less either guile or power to defeat those tokens, which means that it's going to make it slightly easier for you to hit this objective where you're trying to collect 7 corruption tokens. This is going to discreetly speed up the game. It's also going to add a little bit more variability when it comes to you populating these cards, the terrain cards, when you actually flip them over. So that's kind of a cool addition to the game. So kind of I think what you're seeing are small changes to the game in which numerous changes have been made to speed up gameplay. I think that's really important. And Gears of Corruption really speeds up the game. It makes you get into the fun part of the game faster, and it makes the overall game a lot shorter. And I don't know about you, but especially if you've played a ton of board games, anything that makes the game faster or more efficient is a benefit. So I think that these changes are really great in Gears of Corruption. Next up, we're going to talk about additional character and animal combos that appear in the game. So kind of what you're seeing on the screen is that there's 4 extra sets of hero/animal companions that you can put into the game, and each one of them is going to have a unique feel. So if you add 2 additional mechs into the game and then 4 extra sets of your sort of like starting cards, that adds a lot of variability to the game, especially if you're playing a multiplayer game, like maybe a 4, 5, or 6 player game, and each player has a different mech in conjunction with their starting cards. Each player is going to have definitely a unique feel when they play and a different play style that's going to emerge. I think that's pretty cool and that's pretty exciting. So think about all of the additional combos that you can have with the original mechs in conjunction with all of the new character and animal combos, and there's a significant addition to the variability to the game, which I always think is a cool thing. Finally, we're going to talk about the addition of a corrupted mech to the game. So the expansion is called the Gears of Corruption, and what you have is essentially your extra mech, or whatever mech you're not using in the game. So at this point in the game, there are 7 mechs total. So even if you're playing a 6-player game, you have 1 mech that is not being played. Basically what happens is that the first time a glory token is given to a player, so the glory tokens are going to be the star tokens that are associated with the game objectives on this board right here. Once a player gets 1 glory token, the corrupted mech is going to activate. So the first thing that you're going to do is take 5 of the corruption cards from the special corruption deck. And this one's pretty easy to determine. It has the corrupted mech on the back side, and then the cards have a unique style on the front side of the card. So you're going to take 5 of the cards, as we can see, and you're going to sort of put them face up in a deck next to the corrupted mech draw deck. Now what's going to happen is the corrupted mech is going to start roaming around on the board, and basically what happens is that it's going to go once per every sort of player round. So it's going to have a cycle kind of like a player would. So it's going to go once every round that players go. So it's not going to be every turn that somebody goes, but it's going to cycle through all of the players, and then at a certain point, wherever this thing pops, it's going to move. So what you're going to do is simply draw one of these corruption cards, and if you look at the top of the card, there's a directionality to it. So this one says northwest. So basically what's going to happen is it's going to say that the mech is going to move in a northwesterly direction. And then right below it, this is going to be a penalty. So if this mech, for whatever reason, contacts a actual player mech, so let's say it ends up on this space, it's going to induce this penalty on that player. So essentially what's going to do is it's going to smack into that player, and it's going to have that player suffer this penalty. This is going to be a quick clarification to the corrupted mech. We're going to say that this is the corrupted mech. We draw this card and it says, hey, we're going to move north. It's going to try to move north, but you can never have 2 mechs on the same space, so it's going to hit the mech up here. It's going to be the mole mech, and then it's going to suffer a discard function when it actually hits it. So think of it this way, is that this thing can never be on the same location as another mech, and we all know that because the original game doesn't allow 2 mechs to occupy the same space. So if it ever sort of like rams into that space, it imposes the penalty, but it stays in the location in which it started its move. Basically what's going to happen is that if it can't go in this direction, it's going to rotate around and it's going to go to a different location. And basically it moves just once per turn. Now you can defeat this mech by paying whatever cards or paying whatever icons are located at the bottom of the top card. So as an example, if this card pops into play and our wonderful mole character wants to defeat one of the corruption cards actually on the corrupted mech, it just simply has to be adjacent to it, and it will spend 2 power and 2 guile. And what it's going to do is it's going to take this card off the table, and it's going to become a corruption trophy for the mole character. So kind of what you're going to do is place it off to the side of the player board, and that's going to be just like a corruption token. So what does that mean overall in the game? And we have our sort of glory tracker in which we can get the star tokens. Each one of the cards, each one of these corruption cards is going to count as a corruption token for here. So you can gain these corruption tokens much quicker by killing off the corrupted mech. So one of the things that I think people ask and they're confused about on the corrupted mech is that, does this thing stay in play indefinitely? It doesn't actually have to stay in play indefinitely. So as this thing gets more and more cards, it's going to seem frustrating because it's just going to seem like, hey, there's so many things that you have to defeat. There's no way that you can defeat it. Well, think of it this way. Any one of these cards that's removed makes it more likely for it to be defeated because these cards don't actually come back. They're taken as trophies by whatever player defeats it. So eventually, if all of the players, specifically in a 6-player game or a 5-player game, really go after the corrupted mech, they can whittle this pile down pretty quickly. And honestly, there's not many of these cards in the game, and you can actually defeat the corrupted mech if all of these cards are removed from play. So it is possible to get this thing off the table once it actually comes into play. It is going to be annoying with the higher number of players that you have. So obviously this thing isn't going to be very impactful if you're playing a 2-player game. Why? You can just simply walk around it and it's not that big of a deal. But if you're playing like a 6-player game, this thing's going to be bouncing around and running into people, and it's going to be imposing these penalties on the top of the card pretty often. In addition to that, this sort of corrupted mech is obnoxious because if it's occupying a space, the player can't move on to the space. So this thing's going to be blocking additional territory in which the players need to do whatever it is that they're trying to do. So in a 6-player game with the corrupted mech running around, you have a lot of real estate on the board in which players are just simply blocking the board spaces, and you can't actually get onto the spaces because this mech is basically blocking it. So it acts as like a blocking mechanism. It also acts as sort of like a punishment mechanism if it runs into you based upon its sort of like randomized movement. So I'm going to do a quick summary for Scythe Expeditions, the Gears of Corruption. What's kind of interesting about this expansion, I almost feel like it's not as much of an expansion as it is a game patch. So if you play a lot of video games, and you kind of know this, there are quality of life improvements that are added to computer game patches, and that's kind of what Gears of Corruption feels like to me. So all of the stuff that I talked about today, for the most part, really speeds up the game. It makes it more fluid, and it adds more sort of variability to the game. So when I look at, hey, what's actually happening in Gears of Corruption, like I said, it feels more like a patch to a video game than it does an actual expansion. I love the original game. Now, when I played the original game, I felt that the startup time, specifically like the first maybe 5 or 6 turns, were really, really slow. Everybody's fighting over the different workers and whatnot. And I feel like the game was a little bit clunky and a little bit slow. I think what they did is they took all of that input from the players and they sought to fix it. So they added all sorts of different things to it, game mechanics. So they added, you know, sort of these extra sort of gold meeples that can be used for anything. They added a bunch of these like quick start cards where you start with different power and guile tokens on it. It really speeds up the beginning of the game so you can get into the fun of the game, which is exploring it. So all in all, I think this is a great expansion. I really enjoy it, and especially if you like Scythe Expeditions, I think this just really enhances the core game. The expansion wasn't very much to purchase, but like I said before, if you like Scythe Expeditions, this just makes it better. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today, and as always, have fun gaming.